Hello everyone, and welcome to this edition's Hult Thought Leadership webinar series, where we explore the hottest topics affecting society and business today. For those who are joining a Hult event for the first time, just a bit of background about us. Hult have designed a school that looks to the future by focusing on developing your leadership skills, challenging you with a future-oriented curriculum, and building a global perspective that only first-hand experience can bring. We currently offer an undergraduate program, 5 specialist one master programs, a 1-year global MBA, and a uniquely flexible part-time executive MBA. More information on our programs and upcoming scholarship deadlines can be found at www.hult.edu. This morning we are joined by Hult Professor Megan Reitz to explore the benefits of mindfulness in developing resilience and collaboration in a complex world. Professor Reitz has recently published her work on the topic in a book called Mind Time, How 10 Mindful Minutes Can Enhance Work, Health and Happiness. And during this webinar, we will explore how mindfulness helps improve focus, develops perspective, and reduces stress and anxiety. Now, before we begin, just a little bit of housekeeping. The webinar will last an hour in total, and we will have time for questions at the end. A recording of the webinar will also be sent out to everybody after the event. And if you wish to ask a question, please write in the chat box at the bottom right-hand corner. We will then put these questions to Megan at the end. Thank you very much for getting through the housekeeping, and I'd now like to hand you over to Professor Megan Reitz.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lizanne. And hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you happen to be at the moment. It's nice to be here. I'm going to talk to you about some of my research. For about the last 10 years, I've been passionately researching how we talk with one another, how we meet one another, encounter one another inside organizational systems. And part of my research is how are we able to be present with one another when we are working together. And that led me to a real interest in mindfulness and how mindfulness might link to leadership, actually. So I'll talk about a bit about that in the webinar today. First of all, I wonder whether I can ask you to ponder this. Imagine your organization in 5 years' time. Now, what do you think are going to be the critical challenges that face your organization? And also, how do you think good leadership needs to respond to that? And by the way, when I use the word leadership, I am not just referring to the people at the top of the organization. I'm very much referring to all of us within organizations leading ourselves and our colleagues and our organizations forward. Well, this subject has interested me quite a lot, being a leadership professor, and I've looked at a number of research reports that examine what the future of leadership looks like, what the future of organizations look like, and therefore what capacities we need to work effectively within organizations. And here's an example of one of the reports. It's from McKinsey. So I, with British sarcasm, say it's got to be right then if it's from McKinsey. They identify some common themes and see which ones of these resonate with you. So we are leading in an age of upheaval. We have to cope with pace of change, arguably like never before. So in 5 years' time, who knows what will have changed? We have to cope with whatever those changes are. And we need to master how to be physically and mentally fit and resilient. Those things never used to feature in leadership lists about 10 years ago, but they are very firmly there, partly because of the pace of change that I've been talking about. They say that, leaders, but actually as individuals, we are on 24/7. So we are contactable a lot of the time. A lot of us look at our phones even in the middle of the night when we wake up. So we're under scrutiny. And also we're using different ways to connect and communicate with people. The final thing they write about is that, okay, so we're in a very unpredictable, uncertain world, and your organizations are operating within that, you're operating within that. You won't know the answer to things. You won't have full data. You won't have certainty. And yet you need to make decisions. So how does this decision-making process happen in uncertainty? One thing that McKinsey point to is our capacity to challenge and air multiple perspectives so that we can make better decisions. So that's just a taster of one of the reports that looks at what leadership and workplace will look like in the future. From the research reports that I've read, there are 3 capacities that keep on coming up in every single one of them. And they are, firstly, resilience, secondly, collaboration, and thirdly, our capacity to work in what is a very complex, global, fast-paced, moving system. So those 3 things are featuring in many of the reports that I've read, and hence the name of this webinar as well. So engaged in leadership development, I become incredibly interested in, okay, how do we develop resilience? How do we develop collaboration? And how do we develop this ability to thrive in complex environments? And that is really what has led me towards mindfulness. But first, before I go there, I wonder how resilient you consider yourselves to be, and how good at collaborating, and how good in complex, uncertain, ambiguous environments you are. Well, just a couple of quite interesting statistics here. Let's look at the reality. I wonder, if I could see you, I would ask you to put up your hands. If you check your mobile phone, whether that's for social media or email or text purposes, I wonder how many of you check it within 5 minutes of waking up in the morning. Now, if I could see your hands, I would imagine that probably half of you at least would put your hand up now. The stats for UK, Europe is usually about maybe a third of us are checking our phones. And I don't know about you, but when I read my emails, I'm not necessarily filled with feelings of joy. In fact, normally reading my email fills me slightly with some sort of low-level stress. So we're going from sleep to kind of stress and thinking about work very, very quickly. That's just one example of how resilience is being tested. Let's think about collaboration. Many of us need to collaborate across virtual platforms like this. So we're on conference calls, or we're on webinars, or we're talking via Skype or Zoom. So how much do you pay attention when you do that? I mean, this is quite relevant for this webinar right now, because probably quite a few of you are kind of listening in with one ear and kind of doing emails or phone or checking Facebook on the other, because that's just what we're doing now. Research would suggest that with conference calls, 2/3 of us, although I think the number is higher, 2/3 of us are doing other work whilst we're on the phone. Yeah, we're not focused on what we're actually doing. And this has an impact on how we collaborate with one another. Of course it does. And then complexity, you know, we're dealing with a complex situation. So what do? Well, many of us try and multitask. A bit like what I was just talking about then. And one of my favorite research reports here is a research report that suggests that if you multitask, so if you're doing a job task and then you switch to do an email and then you switch back and then you switch, which is what a lot of us are doing, apparently your IQ goes down by about 10 points. And to put that into perspective, the same research report suggested that if you're smoking marijuana, your IQ only goes down by 4 points. So take whatever learning you want from those particular research reports, but we're certainly not working in very sensible ways. We're not working in a way that helps us to be resilient or collaborative or work within complexity. So let's have a look at what we're actually turning up like at work. Generally, although we need those 3 capacities that I've just talked about, most of us are busy, we're tired, we're distracted, and we're overloaded. So that's the reality. We need this, we've got this. And so that's where the interest in mindfulness has partly arisen from. And just today on this webinar, short webinar, I'm just going to talk to you about what is mindfulness and what isn't it, hopefully dispel a few myths. Why is everyone so interested in it now? If you didn't know, they are. And there's a debate going on as to whether this is a fad, whether it's just something that's interesting for a short period of time. How relevant is it to leadership? I'm going to talk about. And again, I don't just mean leadership positions. I mean us leading ourselves in our organization and our workplace. What's the evidence? And how do you practice it? And actually, I'm going to lead about 5 minutes, 4-5 minutes, short mindfulness practice we call mind time later on in the webinar, just so that you can get an understanding of the kind of research that we've been doing and the ways in which we might be able to shape our minds. So let's look at what is mindfulness. Here's one definition. It's probably the most popular definition. It's about paying attention on purpose. So knowing that we're paying attention, bringing our mind consciously to this present moment with a particular attitude that we call non-judgmental. So we're coming to this moment choicefully, on purpose, with an attitude which is curious, interested, and compassionate. So that is the essential elements of mindfulness, and that definition just there was developed by a guy called John Kabat-Zinn, who is a molecular biologist actually at the University of Massachusetts. You may have heard of him. He's widely recognized as the person that has brought mindfulness techniques kind of from Buddhism, but into a secular environment and situation, mainly through his research in clinical settings. So his interest has been, in particular, how might we work with the mind in order to reduce stress and anxiety, recurring depression, and also chronic pain. So he's been working in those sorts of environments and with some very interesting results. So one way of describing this, which is, forgive me, it's a very simple way of pointing out what mindfulness is, but hopefully this will resonate. You can think of your mind as having two modes. So we have the mode which we call experiential, which is you being in this moment, knowing your thoughts, feelings, sensations. You're present, you're here, you're experiencing what is going on right now. That's the experiential mode. And then we have another mode, which we might call default mode or autopilot. And that's when our mind has wandered off over there. That's when our mind is daydreaming, planning, worrying, thinking about what we have done or what we might do. So that just chatter, you know, that chatter and that just, and you'll probably notice it in the webinar, by the way. So you'll pay attention for a little while and then your mind will wander. I'll say something that will remind you of something and off you go. And that's the kind of default autopilot mode of mind that I'm talking about. And just as a way to show this in a slightly more fun way, and to get those of you that are on your emails off your emails for a second, I'm going to show you something very quickly on the screen. I'm going to show you a sentence. You may have seen this on Facebook or something like that. I'm going to ask you a simple question. How many F's can you see in this sentence? And I'm only going to show it to you for a brief amount of time. Here it is. Okay, not long, I know. So I wonder, again, I wish I could see your hands. I wonder how many of you saw 2 or 3? How many of you maybe saw 4? Maybe some of you saw 5. Might be some that saw 6. I'm always particularly interested in the people that saw more than 6 because there were only 6 in the sentence. And if you didn't see all 6, you're by no means alone. Most people don't. Because one reason is we don't see the F's in the word of very easily. And that's because our mind skips over them. It shortcuts of. It's not an important word in the sentence, so we skip over it. We kind of think we know what is there and we move on. And that is such a valuable capacity of us as human beings and our mind. You know, this capacity to shortcut. And this capacity actually to wander our minds, you know, to plan, to daydream. So it's a very valuable thing that we're able to do. And I'm not suggesting we shouldn't do that. But there are some occasions where it's helpful for us to be so focused that we can actually see all the F's in the sentence. So that meeting that's gone on for, 4 hours, and now this is the bit in the meeting where the decision really gets made, or this is the bit where the negotiation works. And you've been in the meeting for 4 hours. Now, despite that, and despite being distracted, it's very helpful to be able to bring your attention, your full presence to that moment. Different context, you're leaving the house in the morning and you're already planning what the day holds. In fact, you've gone through your to-do list at least 10 times, starting by when you looked at your phone within 5 minutes of waking up. And you go past your friends and your family at the breakfast table and you kind of wave generally in their direction and bye, bye, bye. And maybe you miss that look in a child's eyes or somebody's face that says, things aren't okay, actually. I could do with your help, or I could do with your support. And we miss it because we're probably needlessly going over our work again. So that's another occasion where wouldn't it be nice if we could remember to bring ourselves into this moment, to really see one another and connect with one another. So mindfulness is about the choice. It's about knowing where our mind is at and bringing it to the present moment if that's what we would find useful, if that's what other people would find useful at that particular time. So we're coming out of autopilot, if you like, when it's valuable for us. So I want to take you through a quick exercise which will help you to, I think, perhaps sense what I mean by the experiential mode and then this kind of default mind wandering mode. So for about, 4 or 5 minutes, 5 minutes maybe, I'm just going to lead what we call a mind time practice. And this practice is very similar to the one that we used with 57 leaders in the research that we did here at Ashridge. And those leaders practiced this sort of exercise for at least 10 minutes for a period of 2 months. And we tracked the kind of changes that had in them, and also how much practice they did actually do. They were supposed to be doing 10 minutes. They didn't all do 10 minutes. So I'm going to walk you through this. A very simple exercise. All I'm going to be doing is asking you to focus on sensations in your body. So different parts of your body. I'm going to ask you to tune in to what you're feeling. And then I'll ask you to tune into your breath at the end. So some of you might be, on a bus looking at this on your mobile phone. Some of you are walking down the street. Some of you are sitting down in the office. Some of you might be lying down. Wherever you are, it doesn't matter, although I don't suggest you do this if you're driving or if you're in any way in a situation which it would compromise your safety if you were to focus on this exercise. So as I ask you to focus on a number of things, what might happen is that your mind wanders. And that's absolutely fine, because that's what our minds do. All I'll ask you to do is notice if it wanders, and then bring your attention back to what I ask you to do. At various points, I might close my eyes. It can help to close your eyes, but if you're in a position where you can't do that, or you're embarrassed about doing that, it's totally fine to keep your eyes open and maybe just lower your gaze a bit. So just start the exercise, just a few minutes, Just start the exercise with a nice deep breath into the body, a few breaths going deep into the tummy. Just noticing how that feels. You might notice already if the mind is busy. Maybe the chattering in your mind is giving you some opinions about this exercise and what it's like. Just notice that. And then bring your attention and focus to your feet. So the sensations that you feel in your feet right now. So again, you might have them resting, you might have them on the floor, you might be walking, wherever you are. What do you feel in your feet? You might feel the contact with the floor. You might feel tingling. You might not feel anything at all. You might not be able to sense anything in your feet, and that is fine. So there's nothing you should be feeling. All this exercise is doing is tuning you into what you are feeling, what is your current experience. So bringing your awareness now up your legs, your lower legs, knees, upper legs, just noticing the sensations where you feel, noticing where you don't. If you're sitting or lying down now, just notice the weight of your body resting and the contact with the chair or the floor or the bed. Notice again if your mind wanders, see it wandering, bring it back. And this time bring your attention to your back. So we can hold quite a lot of tension in our back. Notice if that's true for you. And if it is, by all means shift, move if you need to. Or you could try becoming quite interested in discomfort. Now, where do you feel it? Does it stay the same? Does it shift? Just having a bit of curiosity there. Have your awareness at your shoulders and then down your arms. To your hands. So noticing sensations in your hands right now. You might even notice tingling in the tips of your fingers. Maybe, maybe not. Bring your awareness to your face and your jaw, another area that can have quite a lot of tension. And then for a few moments before we finish this exercise, bring your awareness to the sensations of breathing. So notice, fortunately, your breathing. Where do you feel that most in your body? Maybe at the nose, at the mouth, at the back of the throat, maybe. Notice if you get distracted, if the mind wanders. Just bring it back to the breath. And all we're going to try and do is maybe count to 10 breaths now. And just see if you can stay with your attention on the sensations of your breath, just over the next 10 breaths. If the mind wanders, bring it back. And then in your own time, doesn't matter if you haven't counted to 10, finishing that exercise, if you had your eyes closed, open your eyes and bring your awareness back into the webinar. Now, I'm not sure what your experiences were during that exercise. Common ones are Some people fall asleep, and that's because we've trained ourselves expertly to fall asleep when we give ourselves a moment of calm. And it takes quite a lot of practice to stay awake. So that might have happened to you. That probably just shows you need more sleep. Some people say that they feel calmer. Now, that's great. If that happened for you, that's lovely. But it's not the purpose of the exercise. And if you didn't feel calmer, that's totally fine. So what we're training here, actually, is our capacity for present moment experience. And what we know from our research, which is in this book called Mind Time, this is kind of a picture of what happens when we do exercises like that, where we try and focus our attention. So if you follow the yellow line, the flat bit is like we're paying attention. I'm paying attention to my breath for like 2 seconds, and then I forget to pay attention, and the line kind of goes up. And then at one point where the star is, we go, oh, I've lost my attention and focus, and we bring it back. And then we hold our attention on the breath for a couple of seconds, and then we forget again. That's what our mind does all the time. So in these exercises, essentially, we pay attention, we forget to pay attention, we notice that, and we bring it back. And we do it again, and again, and again, and so many times. And gradually, over a period of time, those repetitions can make quite a difference. In fact, they can change the shape of your brain, which is a fascinating finding. Perhaps a good analogy here is if you came to me and said, Megan, I need bigger arm muscles because I need to be picking up things and carrying heavier things in my life. So I need to develop this muscle here. I would very probably say to you, go to the gym. And go to the gym and do these arm muscles, repetitions, for a period of time. And if you did that, say for 2 months, 8 weeks, your muscle will change shape. And at the end of that, you'll be able to do stuff that you couldn't do before. It's very similar with the mind. So if we do repetitive exercises, like the ones I've just shown you, it's possible after a period of time that we change the shape and structure of our mind. And in particular, we can develop 3 capacities, which we've called AIM, so that it's a bit more memorable. We think from our research that one thing people become more able to do is allowing. Now, allowing is this attitude that I was talking about earlier. Allowing is the attitude of compassion and kind of an understanding that, well, what is the case is the case. What I find in my experience is my experience. There's no point in wishing it wasn't. Yeah. So during the exercise, you may have noticed it. I was very careful to say, what are the sensations in your feet? There's nothing that it should be. It's okay if you can't feel them. It's fine. It just is your experience. So we're coming to our experience with a compassionate frame of mind. And we know that that really helps learning, but it also helps us do that with other people and in our relationships too. I is for inquiry. So I'm constantly asking you questions, and you become able to ask yourself lots of questions. Well, what do I feel in my feet right now? What is my breath like? Again, we train the brain so that we do that more often outside, which absolutely helps with resilience, collaboration, and complexity, this ability to inquire, to seek out, to understand the world that we're in. And then meta-awareness, a bit of a longer word, slightly difficult to describe, but essentially it's our ability to observe our thoughts, feelings, and sensations in the moment when they're happening. So rather, for example, than being lost in anger, and so angry I'm on automatic pilot, I'm reacting, I'm suddenly able to go, wow, I've got really angry thoughts. Or, goodness me, my body has really tensed, I'm so angry. Or it might be something about noticing, gosh, I'm really angry, and the impulse is to do the following thing. So we have a tiny space where we're noticing our own experience. And that ends up being really quite important, as I'll mention in just a second. So other areas and other people's research around mindfulness and mind time suggests that there may be links with some of the following. You'll see a list of some of the things that have been researched on that relate to collaboration, resilience, and also leading in complexity. Now, I hasten to add that most research has been done on the first one, and that's in clinical settings. So there's quite a robust body of evidence there. The rest of them, we are still very much finding out, and there's a lot of research going on at the moment in mindfulness in the corporate world, but there's an awful lot that we don't know, far more that we don't know than we do know. But there are some really positive results. So let me take you through just a couple of examples. Now, I wonder who's seen this. It's called the pressure performance curve, or the Yerkes-Dodson curve, after the people that created it. It shows a quality of any system, really, including the human system. On the x-axis, we have increasing levels of pressure. On the y-axis, we have increasing performance. Now, if pressure is very low, so in other words, if there's no challenge or stimulation, performance is low. You get bored. Your system gets bored. Your performance is poor. But if you increase pressure, if you increase challenge, it gets to the point where our system really can respond well to that, and our performance increases. But it can't do that forever. We reach a point, our system reaches a point where we start to take strain. The pressure has gone up to such a degree that we now are taking strain. And then we move into stress. And as we do that, our performance starts going down. I think you probably recognize that experience possibly at work. Many of us are recognizing that experience now. My favorite part of this model is the zone of delusion, where you are deluded. You are saying things like, it's okay, I'm going on holiday in 4 months' time, so I'll just push through. Or it's okay, I don't really need that much sleep anyway, I'll just work instead. Or I didn't really do much work on a Sunday, don't really do much else on a Sunday, so I'll just start work early. So these kind of comments, we all have to make these kind of comments at one point or another. But if we're making them habitually and frequently, it's an indication that our system might be under stress and under strain. Now, where mindfulness comes in is with exercises like the body scan that I've just taken you through. We become acutely more aware of our thoughts and our feelings and our body. And that means we can tune in to thoughts like the zone of delusion. Yeah. We can tune in to aches and pains and stress, signals that basically are telling us that we've tipped over the curve and we need to do something in order to get us back on the right side of it. So mindfulness can help in that way. Mindfulness can also help because some of the practices do generate a calmer feeling, a feeling of more peace sometimes. So people can also use it in that way to kind of get back on the right side of the curve. And another very interesting research report would suggest that mind time over a period of time activates the left prefrontal cortex. And the left prefrontal cortex is responsible for what we call the approach mode. So moving towards something with interest and curiosity. The right side is more about aversion, moving away, fear, disgust. Now, if we can generate a curiosity, an approach mode, an inquiry mode, it's kind of difficult to be stressed at the same time. So that seems to be helping with general levels of stress and anxiety and therefore resilience in the workplace. And that's probably one of the biggest reasons why there's such an interest level in mindfulness and mind time at the moment. Now, just to move to somewhere completely different, not an organization that you would necessarily immediately assume we're looking at mindfulness. Nevertheless, the research itself is quite interesting because it was quite rigorous. The US Marines were examining what happens to their Marines in combat zone. So in combat, one capacity that's really rather important is called working memory. And working memory is our ability to pick out bits of information in the environment that's important to our goal and to hold them in our mind and process them whilst we're busy being distracted. Yeah, so you can see how that kind of thing happens in combat zones, but let's talk about complexity in the workplace. It's also a good description of our workplace environment and what we need in complex situations. So what they did was they studied a civilian group, a control group. They studied a US Marines group that had just the normal training. And then they studied a group that had the normal training and 8 weeks of mindfulness training prior to going into combat. And what they found was that the working memory in the civilian group stayed flat, which you'd expect. They didn't do anything. The working memory in the soldiers, in the Marines who just had the normal training, went down when they were in combat. So the longer they were in combat, the less able they were to access their working memory. And those Marines that also did the mindfulness training, if they continued mindfulness practice, their working memory increased. And that's a really interesting finding. And some people have replicated it and some people haven't. So we need to do more research to understand why that is. But if it is the case that those sorts of exercises allow us to retain information and process it whilst being distracted in quite high pressure environments, that's very interesting for our success in the workplace, given what's coming to us in the next 5-10 years or so. So also want to just talk to you about our research that I mentioned before. We basically did one of the world's first studies examining mindfulness practice and leadership. And we were interested in those three capacities that we're talking about the whole time: resilience, collaboration, and leading in complexity. And we worked with 57 leaders. They did 2 months of mindfulness training, and we measured a lot before and after, and we had a control group. So we found statistically significant results relating mindfulness practice to those things on the slide, which include the three that we're particularly interested in. And we also recorded them talking about their experience of practice and their application of mindfulness. In fact, we recorded 27 hours worth of conversation, which we then coded, to try and understand why. Why does this sort of practice help leadership, was what we were particularly interested in. And what our participants told us was, that's where we got AIM from. Allowing, inquiring, and meta-awareness were increasing. And that gave them what I would provocatively say is perhaps the most important leadership capacity that there is. And maybe the most important capacity relating to resilience, collaboration, and complexity. And that's this space to respond. So rather than being on autopilot, it's a tiny little space where we become aware of what is happening, and that enables us to choose a different response rather than react. Now, that capacity alone, our participants told us, helped them to regulate their emotions. They had more choice over their emotions. They could empathize with others more readily, choose to focus their attention, choose to adapt and flex their style and their decisions, and also take the perspective of others into consideration. So rather than being just focused on me, I'm considering the situation from other people's perspectives. And if those 5 things increase, you can probably see how it's likely that resilience, collaboration, and leading in complexity are improved. So, for example, if you can regulate your emotions and take different perspectives, for example, that leads, those are 2 factors that affect resilience very strongly. Collaboration, obviously empathy, and again, perspective taking, adaptability, and leading in complex situations things like focus and perspective taking and emotional regulation become very important. So we're starting to build up an understanding of why 10 minutes of this strange exercise, where you're focusing on something, noticing it, and then bringing it back, why that exercise might assist in these three capacities which we're so interested in, particularly from a leadership perspective. And one other area that I'm working on that's also particularly relevant to collaboration, but also to the others, resilience and leading in complexity, is how mind time training can alter the way that we speak up and listen up to one another. In other words, how can it change conversational habits, our own conversational habits and conversational habits in our team and our organization. And actually we think this space to respond is very, very helpful in enabling us to speak up better and also to listen. And we're running a survey at the moment, a global survey. You can see the link there, and the link's going to be sent out to you as well, where we're collecting people's opinions on how they listen up and speak up. And actually, if you're interested in that aspect, please do the survey. It only takes 10 minutes. And it will give you an option, if you want to, of receiving the full research report when we write it up on that survey. And your results are completely anonymous. If you're in an organization where you have a team or a department or an organization that's very interested in conversational habits, we can even run the survey just for you, and we can give you a code and draw off the results and give you a free kind of report back on your speak up and listen up culture as well, which may be of interest to some of you. So that's where some of the research is now heading, which again is very relevant for the three areas, the three capacities that we've been looking at. And here's an important point, which I'm sure was a question on some of your minds. How much do I have to do? And usually the question is, what's the least I need to do in terms of practice? Well, our research showed a statistically significant change at the point of around about 10 minutes. So people that were practicing for 10 minutes or more has statistically significant improvements in mindfulness and resilience as a result of that. And that is a really important thing to also say, is that the benefits that we think might be available through mindfulness are only available if you continue to practice regularly. So it's not a magic wand. You do actually have to put some work in. But as it says here, you only need to find 10 minutes. And actually that's about 1% of waking hours. So it might be quite a useful investment. If you want to be more mindful, here's a couple of suggestions. Think about when you put it into your routine. This is from our research, some of these. Set realistic expectations. Don't expect to be enlightened and have a calm mind within a week. It's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. So set realistic expectations and stick with it. Notice the benefits that it brings you, because that will help you to practice more. Get support from other people and link up with others. Those things really, really helped our participants. And if you're interested in mindfulness in the organization, first of all, we say start with yourself. So start with your own experience of mindfulness, because that will help you introduce it to others. We know that the system needs to support it, and that's very helpful. You can do workshops and taster sessions. That will not change your organizational culture, I'm afraid, but it will get enough people interested, probably. You can get a space to work and practice. You can give an option for people to practice together if they want to. And we're working with some organizations that do processes like they pause for 1 minute before they start a meeting. It's called a mindful minute. And then they get into the work. And they're reporting that it makes really quite a difference in terms of focus and decision making. So just to sum up, leadership, but just effectiveness in the workplace require different capacities. We used to think that we had to be all sort of heroic, and it was all about a leader at the top of an organization telling everybody else what to do and being very charismatic. Well, that's been replaced a bit by an image of somebody that's more resilient, that's more collaborative, and can work in a more agile kind of way in complexity. And it would appear that mind time practices can assist those capacities, and that's why we're so interested in them. If you're interested in finding out more, there's the book, which is Mind Time. It was published a month ago. Included in the book is access to a website. In fact, you can access the website without the book, but please buy the book. The website's called www.mindtime.me, and you'll get some 10-minute audio downloads through that. The book describes aim, looks at practice and how you practice, and looks at the application of mindfulness to a whole range of different things, including work, relationships, health, happiness, and change. So you can get that on Amazon, hopefully. If you're interested in the research and the data, download the research report for free on the Hult website. And if you're interested in just a couple of little articles on the research, you can see what we've published in Harvard Business Review. There's 2 examples there. I've also published a number of other articles on the speaking up and listening up that I spoke to you about. And if there's anything that you want to follow up with me more on, you'll see my email address there. So I hope you found that interesting. I'm really curious just to take a few questions now, and please do stay for the questions because they might interest you as well. And I'm going to ask Lisanne to sort of do that magic kind of posing me the questions so that I can pay full attention to them rather than trying to read them all. So what have we got?
Thank you, Megan. That was brilliant. So people can see at the bottom, in the bar at the bottom, there is a Q&A box. So if you have any questions, please put them in there and then I can ask Megan. We do have one, first of all, and it is, why do you think mindfulness is so popular at the moment?
Have you lost my, I don't know whether you've lost my screen.
No, that's okay.
You're fine. Why is mindfulness so popular? Okay, I have my ideas here. One is, I think, unfortunately, more of us are far more stressed and anxious and depressed than we used to be. And mindfulness is an option in those cases, which links me into the second reason. There is far more evidence about how we can work with our brain and how it changes our brain than was ever available before. So if you looked, if you were looking for peer-reviewed scientific journal articles on mindfulness in the year 2000, you'd find about 2 a month. Now you'll find about 80 a month peer-reviewed scientific journal articles. And there is just so much research coming at this topic. And that, again, I think makes it more popular and more interesting and a bit more credible as well at the moment. And then I think the other reason is that you've got some quite high profile individuals and organizations talking about mindfulness practice. Google being the obvious one, however many years ago it was that they started the Search Inside Yourself program and their focus on mindfulness. And I think a lot of organizations thought, well, if Google's doing it, it's probably worth looking into. So those are some of the reasons that I think have come together to make it really quite popular. Have we got another one, Lisanne? You're on mute. Any other questions?
Sorry.
I thought you might have been on mute.
Yeah, sorry.
Lots of questions there.
Does Hult teaching treat mindfulness as very important?
Very good question. So I can talk reliably about Ashridge executive education because that's where I do most of my work. So Ashridge executive education is the part of Hult that focuses in on managers and executives inside organizations. So I teach on some of our open programs, the senior executive program, transformational senior leadership program, and those have mindfulness woven throughout. So I teach on that, but also there's daily kind of practices relating to mindfulness on those. I've also taught on the undergraduate degree for Hult on the subject of mindfulness and compassion as well. So yes, it is. It's available via Hult, and it's regarded as an important element as well. And personally, I would say this, I hope it will increasingly be regarded as important and come into a lot more areas in our programs as well.
Brilliant, thank you. How do you think mindfulness will find its place as a practice in a more automated work environment?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I don't know. How is it going to affect when we're more automated? Well, it depends what you mean by automated. If anything is to go by our use of mobiles and use of other ways of communicating and connecting with one another, I think it can help practice. Actually, it might be that we'll find new ways of helping us to practice and shape our mind using these sorts of techniques. Who knows? Social media and apps have actually helped many people through apps like Headspace. So it's possible that we'll find new ways of working with our minds, which is quite exciting. It's also possible that we might feel more disconnected, more distracted, more under pressure, a bit more stressed about some of the directions that we move in which case it also might have a role to play in helping us make the right decisions. We've got some seriously ethical decisions to make with AI and the changes in technology, and my hope is that mindfulness will help us to do those in a considered and thoughtful manner. But it's a great question. Who knows? I think there are opportunities and there are challenges as well in terms of whether this will enable us to become more or less mindful.
Brilliant. And another question here. I'm hoping that you'll understand it more than I do. The results derived are mostly clinical, or are they mostly done on leaders and then derived?
Okay, I will answer what I hope is what you mean by that question. So most research in mindfulness arena by far is in clinical settings. So, the vast majority of research is done on stress, anxiety, chronic pain, and recurring depression. And the evidence base is quite reasonable there. And much of the writing on mindfulness has taken research that's in clinical settings and applied it and assumed that it will therefore be valuable in corporate and workplace settings, which is a reasonable. I think it's reasonable to suggest that if it has beneficial results with people clinically suffering stress and anxiety, it may be a practice that will help over here. People also suffering at those levels in the workplace. The research that we did was not clinically focused. It was on real leaders, real people in real organizations. So that was the aim of our study and very much where our results were focused on. I hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you. How do we adapt to technology, and how it is invading our daily life?
Probably similar to the response I gave before, actually, in terms of opportunities and challenges. How are we adapting to technology? In some ways technology is freeing us and helping us. We look a bit about this in the book, actually. In some ways it's great that we can work wherever we want to, whenever we want to, but of course it has its negative consequences as well, and that's something that we need to really work with in our relationship with technology. So there are worrying signs that we are kind of clinically addicted to our smartphones, and we're showing signs of addiction, and that's a worrying trend. There are obviously also some concerns around how we manage to connect at a human level when we do so much of our work via technology. And I don't think we really know the consequences of that yet. This has all been so recent, actually, in terms of human development and the development of our brain. We're not quite sure what the consequences are on this. But again, I think that's where a lot of research is directed at the moment. And I think technology can help us, and it needs to be used wisely and thoughtfully. And that's again where I hope some of the mindfulness practices might help us in some of our decisions.
Brilliant. And finally, just one more question is, Megan, don't you think that changing your daily habits would be much more healthy than working on your mindfulness inside the world of your daily routine?
Changing habits. Well, again, I may not quite get the understanding of your question. We use mindfulness practice in order to change our habits, actually. It's very helpful. It's kind of what I call an upstream intervention. If you work on your mind, you are more likely to be able to change habits, like the way that we work or talk with one another. It can change habit. We think mindfulness can help change our habits of sleep, for example, or change our habits as to what we're eating. There's some really interesting research on that as well. So I think I think the two are very connected. And I think that it can serve changing of habits in a way that I have to say, I haven't seen anything quite as sort of interesting and positive on giving us that capacity to change habits as mindfulness. So I'm quite excited and interested in how it can help change our other habits, but it's not for everybody. And by all means, yes, I think we need to focus on other areas and do it in whatever way helps us to work with one another better, to be better colleagues with one another, and to make the right kind of choices in our lives and our organizations' lives.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Megan. So we won't take any more questions, but that was really insightful, and thank you everyone for joining. I'm about to post the link to your Qualtrics
yes,
to talk about a bit more about your research. Do you want to just give them a little bit more detail about what it is?
I will just refer back to the survey that I referred to in the middle of the presentation. I would be very, very grateful if you're in an organization, if you can complete the survey. That would be fabulous, and send it to all your friends as well. And if you're interested, if you've got a bigger number of people that might want to do it and see the results of that, please get in touch with me, because I'd be very interested in talking to you about that. And then look out for the webinar in about a year's time when we're giving you the results of that.
Brilliant. So, we will also put it in the follow-up email. So as we said before, a recording of this email will be sent out over the next few days, and we'll put a link to your research in that. Also, if you would like more information on our courses, please make sure to visit www.hult.edu. If you feel this was useful to you, we have a number of other thought leadership webinars coming up over the next few months. More information can be found at hult.edu/events. So that's from us today. Thank you so much for your presentation, Megan, and thanks very much for everyone for joining us. We hope to see you again soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.